I'm Lynn Brantley of Sewn Adaptive, and this is my sew along for ME2125. This first part of the sew along is for this vest as part of the set, the Bermuda short and the long vest. The two pertinent design choices relative to this and adaptive that I did was that the V on the vest is started up higher, and there's a vent in the back, which means when you're seated, it spreads nicely so you can be in a longer vest also. The pieces you'll need for the top for Know Me 2125. Piece 1 of the front, cut 2. And you'll want to make sure and mark your welt dots and obviously cut all your notches. Piece 2, side front, cut 2. Also mark the welt pockets. Side back, cut 2. Your back piece, cut 2, and mark the dots for the back vent. Your welt, you're going to cut 2 and cut 2 of interfacing. Your pocket facing, you're going to cut 2. And the pocket bag, you're going to cut 2 of lining, and be sure and do all the markings on it. Your back neck facing, cut 1 on the fold and 2 of, one in the fold and 1 of interfacing. The right back facing, cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Front armhole facing, cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. Right back facing, cut 1 and 1 of interfacing. The back armhole facing, 2 of the fabric, 2 of interfacing. One thing to note with the pieces that's just significant and just something to pay attention to is for the bottom facings. Piece 15, left back facing, you're cutting 1 and you're interfacing it. And piece 14 is the right back facing, also cutting 1 and interfacing. And then piece 13 is 2 and 2. I just point this out because it's not like cutting 2. There's a specific right side and a left side. Front hem facing, cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. And the front facing, cut 2 of fabric and 2 of the interfacing. So the first thing they're going to have you do is they want you to stay stitch between these 2 notches, and then you're going to attach piece 1 to piece 2, lining up the notches, and sew those together. So now you've sewn piece 1 and 2, front and front side, and I've clipped around the curve, and now I'm going to press the seam allowances forward, and then you can, on the other side, do your top stitching. I typically do a 1/4 inch away from your seam. So you can just do this for both sides. So once you've top stitched, the pattern calls to have you reinforce these corners. And that's just doing a couple of really small stitches in the corner. Because I'm using a micro suede that is more of a home deck weight, I kind of wanted a faux suede look. I'm not going to do the reinforcing, but I am going to draw, and I create a template of the welt box opening, and I would chalk it on there with heat disappearing chalk so that I know where to place my welt. And we're going to start with the welt pieces, folding them directly in half. They have you doing a little basting stitch and trimming it down to, I think, like a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go to the machine and do both of those. Okay, so now you've folded your welt pieces in half, wrong sides together, you've basted, and then you trim it down to a 1/4 inch. So now you're going to take your welt and you're going to place the basting stitch line on the bottom line of your welt opening, and you'll pin those in place, and then you're going to stitch from the dot to the dot your welt to the bottom of the welt opening stitch line, and do that on both sides. So now that I've basted that, you're going to take the pocket facing pieces and the side that doesn't have the markings, the long side, you are just going to turn it and finish it. So for both of them, just finish the bottom edge of the facings. So now you have placed your pocket facings wrong side to right side of pocket bag, and this placement line here is the finished edge that you just did to your facing. You're going to line these edges up, and you're going to edge stitch the folded side to the pocket bag and do a little basting around the edge of the facing to the pocket bag. So now you're going to take the opposite end of the pocket bag, the right side. You can see that's our facing. It's facing down, and you're going to line up those dots that you've marked on the pocket bag, and you're going to sandwich your welt piece that is already sewn down, and you're going to line those up, and you're going to stitch starting and stopping the same place you did on your welt, which is your marking, and don't pass the end of the welt. Start and stop at the same place. Now you're going to cut open the welt box. One thing the instructions didn't mention that I always like to do is I like to mark exactly center of the welt box with chalk, so that I make sure that seam allowances and things are balanced with that center marking. But using your scissors, you're going to cut, I start about 5/8 away from the edge, and I cut from here all the way through to about 5/8 before the other edge, and then you're going to cut to the stitching at a little Y there, a little V. And the same thing on this side. And you want to cut right to, not through, not just before these stitch points on both corners. You press the top stitch line up, press the pocket bag down, make sure the sides of your welts are out and the triangles are folded back underneath here. And you're ready to add your facing and bring the pocket bag up to the facing. So now you've pressed the welt up and the pocket bag is facing downward. If I fold it up, you can see the right side. So we're looking at the wrong side of the pocket bag. And you're going to make sure that the tab ends of the welt are all flat and pointing outward on both sides. And then there's that triangle. I like to pull it really flush and give it a good press. And then the instructions to have you top stitch from the outside, down the side, down the bottom leg, and up the other side. I like to tack onto the welt, I'll call it the tab. I like to tack this down first and make sure that that's fully in place on both sides before I fold the pocket bag up. And then you line that up with the upper part of the welt opening, like that. But you line it up, and you will stitch across here. But first, do that, tacking like I've done here, and on this side. Then you'll do your top stitching that the pattern calls for. Then you'll pull the pocket bag up and attach it to the upper side of the welt pocket. Now you will top stitch a 1/4 inch away from where the welt opens, where the welt opening is. You'll stitch down here, all the way across here and up, making sure that your pocket bag and everything is laying completely flat and flush. So now your pocket looks like this. You've done all the welt stuff for the bottom and you've top stitched, you can see the pocket bag down here. So you're going to turn this over and you're going to take, now this is the right side of the pocket bag, and you're going to line it up to the top of the welt opening. Line those up carefully to get those nice, and you're going to stitch those together, that seam allowance together from point to point, and then you'll finish off the sides and then continue the top stitching to connect where you ended on the front on both sides. So now on the back piece, you are going to do another stay stitch because of curved seams along this line here. So yep, just stay stitched through there, and then you're going to piece your right sides together, starting center back all the way down and stopping right at the mark right here. So now you've stay stitched and you've stitched from the top of the center back to the large dot, and you will open it up and you will press this to your seam allowances to the left. Then on the opposite side, you will, at a 1/2 inch, top stitch that seam allowance down. Now you're going to take your side back pieces and you're going to stitch those right sides together, matching the notches with that stay stitch curve that you just did on your back pieces. And you're going to do that for both sides. So now I have sewn the side back pieces to the center front pieces, and I chose to overlock it since it's not a lined garment. I kind of wouldn't have mind doing it there as well, but move ahead. You are going to press these open and you are going to press your seams to the center. I would go through, as the pattern suggests, and clip through here, through the curve, so that that curved seam lays flatter. And then you're going to top stitch 1/4 inch on the opposite side, which will basically hold down your seam allowance. So now that the back piece is completely assembled and top stitched, I'm going to take the front pieces and line up the shoulder seams right here. And here. And you're going to sew the 5/8 seam allowance here and here. Then you're going to press the shoulder seams or seam allowances to the back, and you're going to top stitch it at 1/4 inch, just like you did the rest of the garment. Now that you've done your shoulder seams and done the top stitching, you're going to want to stay stitch your neck edge all the way around here, so that that doesn't you know, stretch or warp, misshape. And then you're going to take your side seams, right sides together on both sides, lining up the notches, stitch 5/8 all the way down, and press those seams. Now at this point in the garment, I will try it on and make sure I like the shape of how the armholes lay. Now what you're going to do is you're going to stay stitch all the way around your armholes because you don't want those to stretch or get any bigger. And then you're going to take your armhole facing front and back. So your front facing, make sure that's the back facing. And the front facing, and you're going to line up those pieces and sew those together, 5/8 seam allowance. On armhole facings, I definitely will clean up or overlock the edges. So start with stay stitching your armholes, and then we'll piece together the front and back armhole facings. So now I've stay stitched both armholes, and I have sewn together the front and back armhole facings, and I've overlocked the edge so it's nice and clean. You are going to then line up your facings to the armhole. The double notch goes to the back, so that's right there, and the single notch goes to the front. I usually start by lining up at the underarm seam, and then you line up your notches. You pin that all the way around, and you're going to sew 5/8 all the way around for both armholes. Prior to stitching, it'll look like this. So now I've put the facings on both armholes, and I trim it down to about 1/4 of an inch. You're then going to fold these to the right side and press all the way around. And once they're pressed good, you will top stitch 1/4 inch all the way around. And I also like to, if you can maneuver it and stitch in the ditch, I like to tack down at the shoulder seams and the side seams, these facings, so they don't go anywhere. With the top stitching, they won't, and with this being a micro suede, it has a heavier weight. It's a heavier weight micro suede, so it lays like suede. It shouldn't be an issue, but sometimes it's nice to just tack those down so they don't go anywhere. So now that you've finished your armhole facing and you've top stitched, you'll set this aside for a second. And now you're going to put together your front facing to your back neckband facing. And it's pretty standard. Right sides together. There. And there. And you'll stitch 5/8 on both sides, press it open, and then because it's not a lined garment, I would go ahead and overlock the outer seam all the way around the neckband. So now that you have assembled the front facing to the back neckband facing, you are going to line those pieces right sides together to the center front of your garment, matching all the notches all the way around the neckband, matching the notches down center front, as well as the shoulder seams and shoulder seams of the neck facing, and you are going to sew 5/8 all the way from the bottom hem's edge all the way up here to the corner. You'll pivot and go all the way around the neckband and all the way around the opposite side. 5/8 seam allowance. You'll trim that down, you'll press it, and you're going to stay stitch the seam allowance to the facing, or excuse me, you're going to understitch the seam allowance to the facing once you've stitched it on and trimmed it, pressed it open and trimmed the seam allowance. Then you're going to do an understitch of the seam allowance of the front to the facing. So I've trimmed the seam allowance down from the facing, and I've pressed it towards the facing, and now you're going to edge stitch all the way up as far as you can go to where it comes to a point at center front and then goes around the neckband, and you're going to do that on both sides. I like to start at the hem and go up as far as I can to the point, then go over to the opposite side and sew up again, and then do the neckline. You can see I'm right here up to the point. I'll go up as far as I can, making sure that the seam allowance is towards the facing. And then you'll get the whole thing a really good press. So we're now on step 31, just for reference. So you're going to take piece 13 and you're going to, matching the notches here. You're going to line up the piece 13 front hem facing to left back hem facing, so 5/8. You're also going to press 5/8 the seam allowance on each end towards the center, and you're going to do the same for piece 14 and piece 13, the right side. So when your pieces are assembled, they'll look like this. You will have cleaned up, overlocked, finished the unnotched edge of both of these and pressed in 5/8 on both sides like this. So on the outside of the right facing, lower right edge, you're going to fold the center front facing back on itself, and you're going to lap the back edge, the edge facing, the bottom facings, over top of it, and then you line it up all the way across the bottom. And then at the back vent, piece number 7, you will line up the dots and the notch, and you will stitch from here 5/8 down, making sure that's all lined up, and you will lap it over the 5/8 that you folded on the band and pressed, and then you're going to stitch So from here to here, and then here all the way to right here. So you'll trim, stopping here, you'll trim the corners here. When you turn this out, you want to edge stitch as far as you can, the remaining seam allowance to the facing so that you can then turn it to the inside. On the opposite side, you will have lapped it over again, folding the front, center front facing towards the right side of the garment, lapping it over, pinning it in place, and then you will, the folded side of your vent that's on the outside, you will fold that back on itself. I create like a little fold. It has a natural fold from where it came out of the seam. I usually put a little clip there to sort of tell me that's how far back it folds. And then the same thing, this side underneath, you'll lap this over and you will have finished this edge. This side is piece number 7. This was already cut. You fold it back on itself. And now you're going to stitch 5/8 all the way across. You will trim and do the same understitching to the remaining seam allowance to the facing, and then you'll turn everything to the inside and press. So now that you've turned everything, edge stitch and pressed everything, turned out your points, you are going to top stitch through both the vent layers from this point to where the other dot is, and then you are going to top stitch about 1 inch all the way across the bottom, catching the edge of your facing, and then you will finish with the top stitching by doing a 1/4 inch top stitching all the way up to center front around the neck and around the other side of center front. You will also, in the vent, you will baste the inside facing down so that it won't show, but it'll be underneath, but you baste that in place. Then do your stitch line. So now you're at the point where you're going to do your buttonholes and your buttons. And they give you the buttonhole guide to determine where to put your buttonholes. I go a little rogue, and I usually ignore these placements other than the number of buttons. I will try on the garment and determine where my apex is, the fullest part of my chest, and make sure that a button lands there. So let's say that that is right here. I would mark it. I'll just put that there for the moment. And then I use a button placement gauge so that I have even spacing, and I start about, the button guide has you starting about a little more than a 1/2 inch down. So I would make sure that my button placement, that I start with that apex and then I shift accordingly. Specifically with this one, I want to make sure that I end my last button being right about at the waistline so that the vent has the full width when seated, along with the vent in the back gives you that width when you're seated, so that everything from your waist up lays flat. I start at the apex so that there's no gaping. If it's shifted and you're doing it according to the buttonhole guide. None of us are the same. None of our busts land in the same place. This allows to make sure that you have the most secure spot at the apex, and then you determine symmetry below and above using a seam gauge or the button placement gauge. And so you do your buttonholes after you mark where you put them. I usually come a 1/2 inch off of center front and mark the first buttonhole and go all the way down. And in this case, I think there's 4 buttons. 1, 2, 3, yep, 4 buttons. So you would end on the 4th button. Because this is ultra suede, I'm a little on the fence as to which buttonhole method I would use. Because I'm trying to simulate suede, I probably would do a bound buttonhole, which is a different process, and you would do that before you add your front facings. But because it is an ultra suede and not a true suede, I'll do traditional buttonholes and then buttons. But that's another option that you could do.